Alex, and I'm a maker. I've been production designer in film for about 30 years or so. And although I'm doing different things now, which I'll get to, I thought it might be interesting just to kind of look at some examples within that practice and what's changed for us in the film industry as a kind of metaphor for what's happening, I think, in storytelling. So we've focused on something we're calling world building as kind of the evolution of the story space. So world building is a experiential, collaborative, and creative process that integrates imagination and technology, creating story space from inception through iteration and prototyping into manufacturing and delivery, translating an obsolete 20th century industrial model of pre-production, production, and post-production into a 21st century fluid and persistent nonlinear workflow. World building opens new possibilities of immersive storytelling and the weaving of multiple narratives across media. So that's my thesis. It sort of all starts with story. So if we imagine that story perhaps started around the campfire in a kind of tribal community with a shared experience and with the need to make sense of the world really through creating metaphors and translating those into stories. So the chariot crossing the sky and the way that those stories evolved was clearly both mutated orally and developed communally. And then, let's say, with the printing press, things started getting really linear and auteur-based. And it struck us recently, it struck me, and everything I think that we're talking about here is that what technology has enabled is a sort of digital fire around which we can gather. We have this opportunity to really start thinking again in a nonlinear way, in the way that our minds and our kind of community is far more naturally adept in and is fundamentally interdisciplinary. This is a film called Upside Down. It releases in France, I think, this month or next. It was a very, relatively for its complexity, low budget, French, Quebecois co-production, shot in Montreal. I'll just read this quote. Upside Down began like this. One day, an image appeared to me, and with that fundamental image, I unfolded the small but core piece of the story. More specifically, I woke up with the image of a young boy on top of a mountain, looking up to a girl who was on the top of an opposing mountain, upside down. I understood in the next second that they would want to love each other, but that it's going to be very complicated. Juan Solanas, a brilliant writer, young French-Argentinian director, and he approached me to work on this. It was a fascinating challenge because we had to build a world that accommodated this kind of magical realism premise and form a world within which that kind of, this logic could persist. So one of the precepts of world building, I think, is that you have to develop a world and then allow that world to, or the logic of that world to help the story or help stories evolve within it. So if one has a core story like that, which literally was a dream moment for him, so it's a single point in space as much of our creative process is, we have to develop a landscape within which that can occur. Think about the socio-political kind of implications of that world. In this case, a polarized, rich society in the upworld, a poor society in the downworld that's exploited for its oil to provide the power in the upper world, and is ruled by the tower in the center called Transworld Tower, which is a sort of corporate space within which people work sort of from both ends until you reach the middle, and we have zero floor where the upworld and the downworld come to work together. So just sort of an impossible technical problem to establish eye lines, for example, in a space like this. And so although, this is a poetic, imaginative work, it requires an enormous amount of technology to solve it. How the culture works, how you move around in this space, how how one can negotiate the society, where the history lies. So the down world has a rich, apparently previously a rich past that has been oppressed and reduced by the upper world, and then the world itself. So we took Montreal and a kind of combination of fictional architecture and a highly collaged, pasted together mix of Montreal, the rich parts of Montreal for upworld and the poor parts of Montreal for downworld, and cobbled it all together, but created this map just so that people could even understand the space that they were working in. So when you read the script for this, we were writing, doing stick figures in the margin all the time, just to even understand which way up we were, at any time. So this map provides the kind of story context for everything that happens in the world, and clearly you could evolve multiple stories in here, although this was a single linear narrative. And then on the left here, this is using visualization for much more, for what we'd call tech viz, which is extracting the technical information to fit a big set in a small stage with a lot of big, complicated camera equipment to be able to shoot with motion control cameras, the two pieces of the up and the down, to unwrap the sets, put them side by side, with all sorts of systems for video feed to provide the point of view and the eye line for the characters who were being filmed in front of slaved cameras that were shooting them simultaneously so that they were in the same space but separate. So we've really taken, in a film like this, we've taken, after about 10 years of a kind of world-building process and a non-linear process, applying it to a much lower budget film. This is not Avatar, and putting together a world which, in this image, a remaking of that first image that is coherent and geographically correct and provides the context for the story. So the redundant industrial model looks a bit like this. This is how film, still redundant and still continuing to work in this model a lot of the time, starts with a script that is funded, and then as that funding comes to place, producer, director, designer generally wrapped around it, and you go through this baton passing of linear process. So you build the set, the camera comes into the set, the cinematographer says change everything, the light's in the wrong place, I need the window there. The actors come into the set and the director says change everything, I need a door there, the actors need to go out of this door in rehearsal, and then you shoot in production. So it's just going one, and pretty much each of our roles drops away as this process moves forward into visual effects or effects in the earlier part of history, into editorial and distribution. At the bottom there is a kind of, I think, probably 1930s piece of the world of the art director. What we would say is that, in fact, instead of starting with script, we start with story. And around the story, you wrap the director, the producer, the designer. And in this stage, it's very similar. There's nothing really very different to the traditional process. But one adds to this the 3D modeling capability, the visualization process in the center, in the design department now. And those storyboards that are extremely expressive of story intent, but tell you very little about the requirements and the relationship between, I think, what are the sort of three core elements in storytelling and narrative media, which is the character, the environment, and the viewpoint. So you have to constantly negotiate those three elements in telling any kind of mediated story. With design visualization, this is not previs, if those of you know that term, but really more like an exploration of the space in 3D. which moves into previs. So once we know the space, we can now put characters into the space. The characters start developing in that space and the story evolves potentially. And potentially without a script yet until this point, until the story is in place. And then manufacturing develops out of that. So rapid prototyping and a constant negotiation between archiving and design and the ability in a nonlinear way to have this additive iterative process where all of the players are feeding into this visualization space, which is just being updated constantly. So the film space, the design space within film and within narrative media, really is a fully interactive, evolving, creative environment within which it's actually there's very good processes for collaboration within that, and then this evolves out into finishing, perhaps into transmedia art, out into the this is a very design-centric model, but one could put any of these special effects, visual effects, cameraman, anybody in the center, and find a different sort of configuration of what is essentially exactly the same slow evolution or fast evolution out, really from maybe it's more like from low resolution to increased resolution. So the story resolves and the assets evolve and resolve until you get to a film resolution or final, high resolution. And the process looks more like inception, prototyping, capture, and finishing, which is, I think, what we're now moving on into USC. So one of the things I'm really excited about starting to work at Cinematic Arts is that the entire ground floor of the Zemeckis is being put over to a world-building lab. And so the plan is to, and it's really sketchy at the moment, but is to create that kind of nonlinear space and all of the component parts of it. So we have design and prototyping plugged into one another, a smart stage with all of the capture possibilities in the early stages in pre-production and during capture and production, and then finishing, and even out into the audience space and the delivery system. So without getting into the fine detail, this inception, coming out of a world-building core where the story logic has evolved, the inceptive process plugs into that logic. Story evolves with all of the players around that inceptive process into prototyping, and hoping to bring in technology and corporate partnerships into this space so that we have all of the possibilities of fabrication in both the physical, tangible world and in the virtual, using virtual camera systems, using every process, and not having really any idea where those are developing, making it an open collaborative space where any new technology can come in and plug in and help up the system. And then out into finishing, from capture and into finishing, and everything involved in surfacing, rendering, lighting, texturing. And trying very much to look at this, because I'm a joint position between interactive media and production, to constantly be testing this space for both of those forms as a way of pushing against each other and seeing what that opens up for any other kind of story telling platform that wants to come in here. So we're also looking at how architecture can enter the space, engineering can enter the space, theatre, and just make it be the sort of proof of concept of core collaboration. So that's the kind of practical right now, just some performance capture stuff. But bringing technologies in like, G-Speak. So G-Speak, for those of you who know John Underkoffler, who came out of MIT Media Lab, I met through a film called Minority Report, and he came in to that as a science advisor. And during that film, really, the whole paradigm shifted completely for us. We had the first, let me talk about Minority Report a little bit. Minority Report started without a script. The writer and I started on the same day. And so we were forced to, in this case, where we were working within a tradition of script as the starting point of any film, we were forced to think about how to start work without a script. And so the process here was to think about building a world first. Like, we knew some of the logic. We knew that there were precogs who had a 50-mile range, that they were an experimental, a police experiment, that they reduced violent crime and prevented murder. And so people, we imagined, would be pouring into DC, but DC is zoned so that you can't build higher than the Capitol building. And so those buildings would grow rapidly on the other side of the Potomac, around Lexington and in this area. And a vertical city would arise that would sort of symbolize or be a metaphor for the stratification and the journey through that stratification of the story space. So it was really more of a kind of urban planning investigation, like how would a city evolve under these conditions? What would a vertical city look like? How would you get around the vertical city? You know, what's does a whole other world evolve at a higher level, which starts cutting out light from the lower level and really create a kind of a polarized social space? And does that indeed evoke story possibilities? So we looked at Tom Cruise's house, sort of up here someplace, and how he might get to work in the morning, and thought about a combination of a taxi cab and elevator, perhaps, so that he would have this, non-fossil fuel device plugged into his living room that he would sit in and tell it where he wanted to go. And so we had to start thinking about a new kind of transportation. We developed a vehicle that sort of operated like a spit with wheels that rotated independently of each other, wheelbases, that could negotiate this vertical to horizontal surfaces. And then in the art department, developed that into a basic data set that could go out to rapid prototyping so that Steven Spielberg could sign off on this very expensive prop that could go to CNC manufacturing and mold making so that we could create an identical prop that would be at full scale for Tom Cruise to interact with, and into illustration. So this, which is very much a previs up in the top right, a piece of visualization that's based on a physical, on a digital model, is as accurate a representation of the film in its early stages as the final model that Tom Cruise is standing on. And in turn, that set of data could go out to visual effects. So you're really sharing, in the case of Minority Report, for the first time in a film in the very early stages, creating this possibility of a kind of story accuracy at the beginning. So this is the final film up top left in rather low res. This is the prototyping space, just to work out how the vehicle might move through any set of conditions. And the previs, which is remarkably similar to the film because it was actually where the directing took place. So Steven Spielberg did all his directing in the digital space, in the previs space, and then this became the map for the final film. And so that in itself is a radical sort of new departure, is that you can, that where filming starts is really evolving completely now. With James Cameron starts doing a rehearsal with a virtual camera in the in a green space for Avatar, he can call it a take, and it's a take, even if it's 6 months before the start of shooting. So we have to really start thinking about at what point you lock a story, at what point, who arbitrates that, where is what is a script? Now also, Minority Report kind of changed a lot of stuff for us, other than being a really fundamental shift in the way we approached design in film, it set up all sorts of contacts. We had a think tank at the beginning, and a lot of people from Media Lab, Neil Gershenfeld, and head of architecture, sorry, I can't remember, Bill Mitchell. And we were, out of that, invited to Media Lab and to have a look at the technology space there. I got really hooked on this idea that one could move out of the silo and into the interdisciplinary space. And eventually, very gratifying, I was invited to come and design this opera called Death and the Powers for Todd Mack over at Media Lab. And spent 5 years going back and forth through generations of students, their graduates, turning each piece of design into a thesis project and trying to get it up onto the stage. And eventually it opened in front of, in Monte Carlo, the same opera house as Mozart opened his opera. So it was a fantastic experience. But the fantastic opportunity to see how one could take in this context of this story, the lead character, Simon Powers, leaves the stage in the first scene and never comes back, basically. And he performs from off stage. So, and his performance, and it's sort of integral to the storytelling, drives the set. So the set has to become a living embodiment of his performance. So we were really deeply investigating the possibilities of measurement and measuring breath and movement of the chest and timbre of voice and position of arms and using that to change the media on these giant screens, three-sided screens here that were robotic also, and these little robots that were sort of Greek chorus cast of characters, and so that the performers could continue to perform in relation to and off the set itself. And also out of this new sort of interdisciplinary relationships, Paolo Antonella at MoMA invited Greg Lynn, Peter Frankfurt, and myself to collaborate on a future city called New City. So the premise was that the surface area of this manifold kind of planet was the equivalent of the surface of all of the cities of the world, and that it was a space within which populations could, as avatars, could occupy, but a space that had a direct relationship back to the real world. So whether it's affected by climate or financial conditions or any number of real world conditions altering what happens in the virtual world and vice versa, that new cultures would evolve theoretically in this space because these manifold shapes move against one another, and Helsinki moves next to New York, or there's a possibility of these new cultural interchanges. So I think where that has gone to now is just this possibility that one could create entirely, well, not entirely, virtual story spaces that have these a foot in each side of the membrane. So that this I think the most exciting space of the future for us now, where you can really say there's these direct correlations or relationships between the real world and the artificial. But in the artificial world, what I'm most excited by is that the technology is allowing the processes that we use, the way we sketch, the way we think and create, to more resemble the way the human mind works than ever before. As a designer, the idea of a 2D drawing pencil lines on a piece of paper to represent 3D space is a very bad metaphor for dimensionality and space for the imagination. So I think that sort of is the exciting future now. And luckily, being out of time, we're just. But just to say now that my preoccupation is how to apply what we've learned in this film story space into a far broader cross-media, transmedia environment, and also how to create a new business model that allows us to work in a cellular way, in the way that we have traditionally for the last 20, 30 years in film, to be able to allow people at the highest level who are trapped sort of within their own silos to work together in this new kind of organization, balanced by the network that 5D Institute, which is our conference space, contains, so that we're gathering people and a distributed network of people to the Institute. And just to say that we have a conference next month called The City in the Book. If anyone's interested, we'd be very, very much like to invite you. The premise is that if the city is virtual and the book is interactive, what's the difference between the two? Thank you.